welcome all to Food for Thought. It's a webinar programme at the Athena Advisors within Stronger Together, which is our portfolio of capacity building activities for professionals involved in social justice work. It's designed to be informal and a gathering of people to learn from one another in discussing some of the most challenging issues of our time. This will be our final session of 2023. And it's one of our favourite topics at the Athena Advisors, gift acceptance. And it's fun because it's festive. So let me introduce today's presenters. So first up, we've got Dr. Michelle Fugiel-Garter. And I'm sure I've said your name wrong, Michelle, so please do correct me at a later point. But Michelle is a philanthropic advisor, researcher and educator. As a chartered advisor in philanthropy, Michelle offers advisory services where she guides individuals, couples, and family foundations in their philanthropic endeavours. Her research focuses on philanthropic foundations, particularly on foundation professional experiences and foundation work. And she instructs nonprofit management for the next generation of nonprofit leaders. She also produces the Women in Philanthropy podcast, which we love, and works as a postdoctoral fellow over with Philanthropic Foundations Canada. Okay, Michelle, you are a busy woman. So our other presenter is Robin. Robin Heller is the founder and president of the Athena Advisors. We're a consulting firm that helps nonprofit organizations to be able to achieve their social justice missions through fundraising and capacity building. Working both within NGOs and as a consultant, Robin has worked with many organizations, including those who work with very sensitive missions, including serving children and youth, environmental causes, and independent journalism. She divides her time between London and Washington, DC, and as she says, today she's across the Atlantic. So, over to you, Michelle and Robin, and thank you.
Well, I want to take the liberty of beginning by welcoming Michelle and thanking her. And we had the most fun planning this about a month ago. It was a good conversation, and I want to start by saying, Michelle, both you and I are really jazzed about this issue of gift acceptance policies. It is one of my favorite subjects, but why on earth why are you so excited about gift acceptance policies?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think essentially because I've seen the implementation go wrong. And I think that there's, especially when you read in the media, the way that the media writes some of these stories, it's almost like you can only see it in hindsight of all the little pieces that went wrong. But it starts with gift acceptance policies and why those are important. And so for me, it's the implementation and what can we learn from that and what are the key stories and tensions.
Well, and there are a lot of good stories, and sometimes it's really nerve-wracking to read about things that end up in the press because all of us have worked for nonprofits, and it could really go wrong. So thinking about systems and structures and policies help us to sleep at night, I think it's fair to say. For me, what I really love about it is I love gift acceptance policies because I think it brings in a richer discussion of ethics around fundraising and nonprofits. And I love the topic of ethics, and I'm interested in how the subjects of ethics look different from country to country in some ways. It's not that there aren't some irreducible ethics, but there are differences between country to country and between countries. So, I love the fact that if we're going to talk about gift acceptance policies, we get to talk about ethics, and we get to talk about, what if. It's a really rich conversation. I'm going to turn it over to you because you wanted to share with us at the high level some of the things that you've been thinking about when it comes to, do you take a gift? Do you not take a gift?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think just sitting in the context right now, here we are at the end of the year, and research shows that charities are receiving about a quarter of their annual budgets at the end of the year in gifts. We also just finished Giving Tuesday, which again, end of the year. So it's a really timely, this is a really timely conversation. Like I said before, I think a lot of this happens in hindsight. And so when we can talk about it in hindsight, hopefully preparing for the future, I guess I'll just say there's three things that I would just touch on around gift acceptance policies and why they're important for organizations, but also in that what happens. So we see that it's really important for mission alignment and integrity of the organization. Certainly gift acceptance policies can help protect and guide the organization, like you were saying, in how they want to be seen, how they want their mission to go. And it's really critical for the public trust. This is a really big piece, the public trust of charities, which there is, at least in my jurisdiction in Canada, some evidence of a declining trust in charities. And so again, a gift acceptance policy and then also the implementation really is important for maintaining that trust. So, you know, the ones that we have, the stories we have right now, the ones that are always top of mind are the Sacklers, and how those gift acceptance policies, if they were in place, have changed over time. So as you were saying, different jurisdictions for ethics, but time as well. What is ethical at one period of time changes. There was a recent, this is a really interesting example. There was a recent case in Canada. So in 2016, the Elliott Trudeau Foundation accepted a gift from Chinese businessmen. Now, this foundation is funded with government money, so it adds a little bit more complexity. But fast forward to 2023, and because of the way the implementation happened, how the foundation thought it was coming from two businessmen. It turns out they probably had a closer proximity to the Chinese government than was ideal. And so it was actually through a Globe and Mail media article that found that this donation had been held and caused chaos within the board of directors of how do we return this? To whom do we return this? And does it look like Chinese government money? And so they did end up returning it, but subsequently the entire board of directors and CEO stepped down. So
Amazing.
Because they were unable to determine, should we have an independent investigation, what was the role of the board in making these decisions? So potentially, even if there was a gift acceptance policy, in this case, you can see how over a 5-year period of time, it goes from accepting the gift to everybody stepping down. And so there's that big question of implementation. The other one I would just mention is, again, here in Canada, recently at University of Alberta, there was let's see what it was. It was, they returned the endowment of a 98-year-old man. And this man was just, he was just recognized.
I read about this,
Yeah, in the House of Commons. He was recognized in the House of Commons. And then subsequently, they found out he was a Ukrainian soldier who was in a Nazi unit fighting against the Soviet Union. And so the University of Alberta had an endowment and they returned it. And again, this timeliness of what is ethical at one point or accepted, it can change. And so I think this is really interesting because then recently you have the UK Charities Commissioner talking about charities shouldn't be personally squeamish when accepting money. That
should not be.
They should accept it.
You need money to operate, which is also the tension.
So it was it seemed to be a confusing comment by the UK Charities Commissioner, who obviously oversees the regulation of charities, who would be very interested in the mission alignment and integrity of charities, then saying, well, let's not be too personally squeamish and let's accept money. So I think you have this, that's sort of the first piece, that how do you align this to your mission? How does this keep charities' integrity, hold it up, especially over time? And what does that mean when ethics change, when gifts are made, when mistakes are made? How do you operate in that type of environment, especially with conflicting either financial signals that, well, we need money, or
Yeah.
you have a regulator saying, well, you should accept money.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, I'll just add that I think this goes back into, again, the transparency and accountability of charities.
Yeah.
Both the what, sort of the what assets they accept, and gift acceptance policies, there's all those listing of what assets to accept, as well as the how, sort of how do we accept these assets, what demands do we accept from the donors, and that accountability and transparency piece of, should the public know what we're accepting? And so
Mhm.
in the
What
Sackler
do you
case,
think? Oh, go ahead, please.
oh no, I was just going to say, it's interesting. I think this is another tension point. In the Sackler case, the Metropolitan Museum refined their gift acceptance policy to say that anything that's not in the public interest, they will no longer accept.
Pretty
So
broad
how do you,
statement, though.
it's a pretty broad statement. And then another University of Toronto just returned a donation from Amazon, although it was undisclosed who the donation was from, but they returned it because it was not public. They did not
Yes.
make public who the donor was. And again, this idea of being public with these donations contrasts some of the anonymity provided in philanthropy. So again, I think it's that question organizationally of, to what degree do we want these gifts to be public, to hold us to this, transparency and accountability standard, and what is that tension with our donors. I think, I mean, and I'll just kind of end and say, I think that, and I'm sure that this ties directly with your ethics, is that in implementation, this is not a document that can just sit on the shelf. I think we say that about all
Yeah.
nonprofit documents. We say like, oh,
Yeah.
it shouldn't just sit on the shelf. This one specifically feels like it can change rapidly over time. And as you
Yeah.
said, jurisdictions, and that different board of directors, different leadership have to have eyes on what the previous gift acceptance policy has said, what it means, how it's been interpreted. Yeah, so I'll that was just to sort of to frame some of the tensions. I have a few other little stories, but I'd love
There's
to
lots
hear
of
how
no, no,
Athene
no.
yeah.
Happy to share how we think about these issues, but how have you worked with organizations? Have you helped organizations to create a gift acceptance policy?
Yeah, I think that so because I work mainly in the foundation world, a lot has to do with private endowments, but certainly when it's coming to more of the public facing, but also private foundations too. I think the way that I've approached it has really been to generate these questions, to generate
Yes.
questions about what are the values, what is the mission alignment,
Yes.
things like what would be the ethical decision, where would the line be, what is the line, where would the line be, what does that mean? I think another really important question, and again, that's often around issue, that's often around the values of the organization, the values of the founder, the family, but also in making that decision, which stakeholders are we prioritizing?
Love it.
I think that's a really important
Absolutely.
question, because you are making a choice. Like we said, public interest is quite broad, but what stakeholders does that choice prioritize? And how does the organization deal with that if it's not prioritizing the donor, let's say?
Yes.
It's prioritizing public interest instead. And what is that?
Yep.
How does the organization manage that?
Yeah.
So the question, sort of this question based, this, as you were saying, this ethics, like sort of ethics framework, having organizations think through that.
Well, and I love how you're framing this, because I think it is more about questions than answers, which is where we've landed. And I want to say that we at the Athena Advisors help a lot of organizations to write these, and I want to, before I move into what might a gift acceptance policy contain, I want to say that oftentimes we talk with an organization and we say, do you have a gift acceptance policy? And they say, no. But I say, do you have gift acceptance practices? And they say, absolutely. You know, we know we're gonna recognize people this way and we're gonna take money from this person, but not that person. So people often have practices and um, they are hard, held very firmly, but they're often unexamined. And so that's where I love the process of creating a gift acceptance policy with an organization. And you know, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the process we use, but then I'm going to walk you through a gift acceptance policy. And I'm not going to go into high detail because for one thing, you know, we're busy and we have other things we're doing today. But for another, uh, these are documents that organizations really take their time to create. So for example, we work with an organization that focused on peace, and it had something like 30 employees in 10 countries, lots of different languages. Some of them were in war zones. So what we did was to interview 100% of the staff. We went to the client and we interviewed every staff member because people really care about who your donors are. Even somebody making a decision to come work as an entry level data expert or the secretary at the front desk. These are people really care how you got funded. And that's certainly a trend that I see greatly increasing. So we wanted to hear from everybody. What constitutes the right donor to accept funding from? So we and I want to go also to your point about, so why are we doing this? And I think it is about risk to some degree, and that's fair. And as I thought about it, some of the things that are at risk, you know, you want some guardrails on where you take money from because of the reputation of the organization, the risk to the donor, and we could have another entire conversation about something that, at least in the UK, is called duty of care, being very careful about where you, the power dynamic from a donor who may be compromised because of age or mental capacity. You know, we have a duty of care. So again, we want to be really thoughtful about how we take funding and from whom, because there is risk to the donor. There's also, I think, frankly, risk to the beneficiaries, and we'll talk about that when I go through a gift acceptance policy, because I think that we really want to be thoughtful about taking a gift, and is that okay with the beneficiary? So you know, if you have a client that works with countering sex trafficking or human trafficking, or if you have an organization, you know, there are people who are directly affected by that, the beneficiaries, and what are their considerations and thoughts about the source of the funding that you're receiving. So there's a lot of things at play. I am in favor of not so much putting in writing, we're never going to take money from these people or these companies. Usually it's companies. You know, we're not going to take money from these companies and listing them by name, because that's a non-starter. And most organizations that need help with a gift acceptance policy, that's as far as they get. And by the way, in this webinar, I'm not naming these companies, but so, you know, but imagine a company that you feel strongly, we are not going to take money from. And that's where the discussion stops with the development team, with the senior staff, and with the board. So it grinds to a halt. You know, Michelle, to your point, it's much more effective to say, what are the questions that we're going to raise about the context of a gift? So if people are into this, I want to just open up a policy. I'm not going to share it, but I want to walk you through some of the elements, because these are hard-won ideas over the years. And what I hope is that people will take away, you know, I hadn't thought of that. And that makes sense. And we do need to include that. So when we put together a policy, like most policies, we want to think about who's responsible for it. And I think, most healthy, mature organizations, it's the top staff person is responsible. And then sort of as a default, if you can't figure it out, talking to the board. But the board should not be involved in this. They should be involved in approving a policy, but not in terms of the execution. But sometimes questions about where to accept funds from those questions do need to go to the board. We then will help an organization understand, well, what does this cover? And what kind of gifts are we talking about? And it's hard to imagine an exceptional gift. And by that I mean, of course, it guides gifts with institutions and gifts from individual donors. Although I think, as we said before, most people get really wrapped up in the corporation. Although Michelle, as you mentioned by citing the samplers, certainly individuals have been on the hot seat. So we have language often in a gift acceptance form that says, here's why we're taking a gift. And that helps. And frankly, we just spell out, we're taking it to run the operations or specific programs that we have in our strategic plan. And just to lead to the ending a little bit of the policy, we are in favor of having this be fairly transparent. That it's a policy you could share with a donor. You could put it on your website. So saying up front, the gifts we're going to take are about operations and specific gifts. That gets ahead at least a little bit of a donor who says, I want you to go in a different direction from what you usually do. We also put in who has the ability to accept gifts. And these are self-evident things, except when one of your senior staff members is out and says at a party, yes, we will accept. Yes, of course, we will accept a gift that supports my program alone. There needs to be a culture, I believe, that there is a line of decision making. So we're clear who has the ability to accept a gift, and ultimately, it's the executive director. Then we do talk about what happens when it's complex. What does it mean to accept complex gifts? And this is where we talk with the organization, understand who are the rights people inside the organization to help figure it out. And it might be, the president talks with the CEO or the CFO, and if no one can figure it out, we go to the board. And it's really as concrete as that. So we do recommend that people, if they have irreducible, I'm not going to take it from a certain sectors, say that. So I'm going to read one that is not specific to one organization. Many of the organizations we deal with would appreciate this language. We're not going to take money from people whose current profits, and note that term current profits, come from weapons manufacturing. Current profits come from illegal activities, and current labor practices are unjust, illegal, or involve human trafficking. Why am I saying current? Because some corporations, if they're 100 years old or more, they were involved. They probably were involved in activities that are no longer acceptable. And times do change. So I think it's helpful to, even as you think about it, say, how long in the rear view mirror are we willing to go to say, we saw a change in 1950, saw a change in 1970. It hasn't behaved that way. They operated in a legal way for the laws of the time. They have changed. Times have changed, and we're willing to consider them. So the term, where are the current profits coming from? We spend a lot of time helping organizations talk about due diligence. And this is where it's a chance for the organization to put together the questions that they should raise with everything that's complex about a gift. Do you know the donor? Have
Mm.
you used prospect research to make sure that this is the right donor for you? Um, have you taken a look at the individual or organization of the leadership of an organization, of a company? And have they engaged in any problematic or questionable behavior? Now, we all lead complicated lives, I'm sure, but we do put a window in. Some organizations are happy to say, if the person at the top has had some questionable behavior in the last 2 years, 5 years, decade, but to come up with something not as a hard and fast policy, but a question that you want to raise. Have you taken a look as an organization at their social media platforms? Is there anything that they've said that would be controversial against the mission of your organization? Have you taken a look at the investment practices of a corporation? Um, does the corporation, for example, have a corporate social responsibility policy? And do you have any evidence that they're adhering to it? Is there any press about unfair labor practices? And here's one that is really an important question. We work with a number of journalism organizations. Nonprofit journalism is supported a lot from individuals and foundations, less so from corporations, because a lot of our clients are investigative journalism organizations. So part of their area of investigation in the public interest is a corporation. But even if if your organization is accepting funds from um, individuals, is there any sense that the person will want to have undue influence on the programming? In the case of a journalism organization, the journalism, are they gonna wade in and get involved? Is there anything about this that would adversely affect the reputation or the public image, or even the long-term ability of the organization to raise funds? So that's a really important one. If I take something from this donor, will that be so controversial that I will have difficulty raising funds in the future? And finally, we suggest raising the question of will beneficiaries be opposed to the fact that we've taken a gift from a particular corporation? If a couple more thoughts, and then we want to open it up. But just to round this out, we work with organizations. Some of them are deeply committed to the peace and reconciliation. So they believe in hope that people will change. So what do you do if you have someone who has behaved badly in the public sphere, wants to give a contribution, and you would like to take it? I think that's where, in our policy, the policies that we write do include this. They have to be able to say, I'm going to have a meaningful conversation about this. I'm going to be transparent about it. You don't want to have the person's gift be able to remedy their social ills that they have not personally addressed. On the other hand, we work with social justice organizations that believe that people and countries and governments and corporations can change. So there has to be some asterisk, I think, about that. I want to close by talking for a moment about disclosing gifts, which we also put into a gift acceptance policy. So we help an organization figure out, how do we put it on a website? What happens if, and this is really common, so let me just stay with this one. What happens when a donor says, I don't want, I want it to be anonymous? And we're able to, most organizations can and should say yes to that. That's the donor's interest. Where there's a risk of accepting money is when you as an organization don't know who the donor was. So, and this happens a lot if you're accepting money from donor advised funds. So I have had the instance where a donor advised funds, somebody wanted to give a gift, again, to that journalism organization. but they didn't want the journalism organization to know that they gave it. And you can choose other organizations too, peace building organizations, children's organizations, whatever, environmental organizations. So perfectly innocently, someone may say, I want my donor advised fund to give money to a good organization, my good organization, but I don't want you to tell them who I am. And I must say, I have had to pick up the phone and call the donor advised fund and say, you have to tell the donor that they at least have to tell the CEO of this organization or the CFO. You don't have to tell me, but we can't take money where we don't know where it's from. And you could write novels about the possibility of risk on this. So you have to know where the money's coming from, because everything in this climate is known. Let me stop there. Michelle, what are your thoughts? And then we'll bring folks into this. And Lucy, I bet you have some thoughts too. Michelle, what are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, I love everything that you've said. I'm really glad that you raised the question of how do the beneficiaries feel about where the money's coming from. That I think it's really important. I think, on kind of the other side, we've seen this on the investment side where foundations will invest in sort of traditional things. But it goes maybe against their programmatic aim. So maybe on the program side, they're working to, anti-smoking, like no tobacco, but they invest in tobacco. Or maybe they're working on something else, and whatever their investment is contrasts their actual programmatic aims. So I think that beneficiary piece, both in how investments are done, but also how gifts are accepted, is really important. And so I'm just so pleased that you're asking the question and going through the process of interviewing everybody in order to get that information. Because we can't assume, right? We can't assume we know what people will say. The other piece that your thoughts brought out for me was, so obviously fossil fuel divestment is a very big topic right now. And again, impacting the investment side. I think it's a really interesting example. So it's one that, again, doesn't say particular companies' names, but you could deduce the companies involved with this. One example I have is that, and again, to this jurisdictional piece, is that there was an organization in the US who had created a gift acceptance policy that did not take money from fossil fuel companies, right? Completely within the remit, right? That can make some sense. The challenge came is that this organization had international franchises. And so one being in Canada. Now, Canada is a very large resource-based economy. So not just fossil fuels, but also lumber and mining and all these things. And so what happened in that case was that there was a program that was attempting to be constructed that would have been beneficial. There was a fossil fuel organization with a very, very strong CSR community investment capacity, demonstrated impact, all these things. But the organization in Canada was not able to accept the donation from that company. And so the reason I have this example is we in previous organization played as sort of an intermediary in both the conversation of how could we get to a yes, what would we need to demonstrate, but ultimately the gift acceptance policy was sitting in the US and it was a no. I guess I raised that to also say, don't think that there aren't workarounds. So and that's where
transparent about the workarounds.
You do need to be transparent. And yes, absolutely. I think you do need to, and I think that's back to the point of having this larger discussion. So when it's cut and dry, it's just a no. But when you start to add the nuance of this is the economy that you're working within, these are the outstanding companies, these are the demonstrated track record, these are the leadership, you're having a much more in-depth conversation as opposed to saying absolutely not. Now, I know fossil fuels are kind of tricky right now because that's the direction. Again, there's a timeliness, right? Direction of travel. But I do think it still is required, especially when you have franchises in different cultural jurisdictions, who may have a different perspective or a different actual, economic need to rely on these companies for their charitable giving. And so, yeah, so those were some of the thoughts that were coming up while you were talking. Again, these intricacies in the implementation of how these policies are put together. And in your example, when you already do the upfront work of engaging people and starting with conversation, then it's not such then it's a practice that's ingrained in the whole implementation. It doesn't just become this is our policy.
Right.
No.
Right.
It becomes part of this is how we're learning, this is how it's evolving. This is how we're staying up to date. So I really appreciate the approach that you shared.
Yeah. And we can be decisive. We don't have to talk with every human being in a company to to make a policy. But sometimes and we found it extremely valuable, and that's been our practice on this one. I'd love to bring in Max or Juliet, Lucy, others with questions. We can chat about this more, but yeah, thoughts from around the world.
Well, if you give me the opportunity to contribute, I'm not exactly one to keep my mouth shut.
Let's hear from Juliet.
I was just thinking about the DAF, and I think it was really excellent what both of you said about it. My thoughts about DAFs in a challenging your position method. I completely understand, following from a tobacco company, funding children who have lung cancer, there's a whole, whereas the moral values in that and everything else. But if you're thinking about more individual philanthropists, you have things like MPT and CAF and the one through Halls and Prism. I would propose, if one puts forward that you can't have confidentiality through a DAF to a certain level, you're going to lose a lot of funders, because that is why philanthropists choose DAFs, because they have the, anonymity that goes with it. And I would put forward that there'll be quite a big dip in philanthropists if suddenly the anonymity that goes with your DAF. I mean, even if it's, I'm sure you can set up policies that you can't make it public on the Daily Mail who gave which donation, and the only person who can know is the beneficiary, but then the beneficiary can go and shout about it or change their minds. And so where does who has that choice in the end?
I think I think to your point, it gets trickier the more we're a world that everything runs through DAFs. And Lucy, at some point we should probably have a food for thought about DAFs. I think because they're
That'd be a good one.
They're lots of different things to say about them, but we just it's an abundance of caution. And to to Michelle's point, there probably should be workarounds. I just want someone to know. I just, want, I just, there's a lot of risk that someone you didn't want to know would give to your organization. It's peculiar, but if we have a good working relationship with the employee at the DAF, I can live with that. I mean, it's not my call, but my counsel. But somebody needs to know and assure us that it's not, and I'm not going to name names, but that it's not something that if it were on the front page of the paper would be so peculiar and at such odds with the mission and was contributed to be mischievous. So that's the workaround that I propose. But you're right, DAFs are the 10,000-pound gorilla that everyone's trying to figure out how to work with them. It's a great point, Juliet, without a doubt.
Yeah, and I would also just say, I think, I'll put on my researcher hat for just a second. And I tend to think that anonymity isn't really achievable, but confidentiality is. And
yes,
so,
perfect.
Yeah. And so I think, we've said, oh, donors can be anonymous. I actually don't know if they've ever probably been anonymous, but probably quite confidential.
Yeah.
And to your point, Robin, that's exactly what happened in the Trudeau example, is that it was a freedom of request or freedom of information request or something like that by the media to find out who was this donor that led to this whole China scandal. And so
Yeah.
if the organization doesn't know and have that information up front, somebody else will ultimately find that out.
Yeah.
And right there, you have that surprise on the front page that you really don't want to deal with. So I think, even in research, we're able to keep things confidential and protect who knows and protect, people's attribution to that. But I think that's it's an important it's important to think through what confidentiality would mean.
Yeah, and this is why these terms are so important: confidentiality, anonymity. A decision not to. What are the levels of confidentiality? And that's where organizations can take some time. And in the day-to-day fray, they just haven't. They're just accepting things. I'd love it if this group, I mean, if there's an example that you have where you have been, no names on this, but disquieted or have turned down a gift. While you are thinking, I'm happy to start, which is that there have been times that we've said not yet. Because we were getting to know a donor who was like, I'm giving you millions. You're it. And I'm going to call in all of our friends. And we're going to do this. And we just need to see, your whole organization get behind us in this direction and everything. And I think it takes some psychological sophistication to know about what drives donors to do things. But I think at moments like that, it's okay to say, we're not going to take that now. Let's continue to get to know one another for a little longer. I think that's fair. Juliet.
From that, and again, I'm not asking you to name names, obviously, but can I ask what the response was about the donor? Where was your discomfort?
Yeah. So the person in question, there's no way that you'll guess this. I have a super long career and lots of different human beings. But the person would become very tearful in talking about making these gifts, and her family was worried. Her family told us that they were a little worried about the magnitude of what she was planning to give. She wanted it done now. She wanted, the cause was compelling, and so the response that she was able to pay money toward. And how many of us are not heartbroken about some moments that we see things in the world? She had the ability to give half her savings toward this. Her family was worried. She had difficulty even talking with us without becoming very emotional. There's a duty of care. So we said, let's hold off. Let's keep getting to know one another.
Thanks, Robin.
I'm looking around for a place to plug my computer in. So I might have to switch media, but I also want to give us.
Go
ahead, please.
No, I was just gonna say on that duty of care piece. I think this is just is that it is a relationship. It's a relationship both ways, and that the best fundraising, and this is demonstrated in fundraising research as well, is the annual giving campaigns that we all see, again, end of the year, cost a lot of money. It's a short-term strategy. It costs the charity a lot of money. But if that relationship building isn't there in place within the organization to either take it to the major next level of donors or plan giving or whatever, those are the places where the relationships develop. Those are the places where it actually becomes more cost effective for charities. But it's the longer term view. It's having the capacity within the organization, the buy-in of the board, the staff members who can create those relationships. So I think in terms of again, back to implementation, which is where I always go, but it's to think through that organizational pieces. How are we building relationships with our donors so that we can have these conversations so that our staff are comfortable having these conversations, that it doesn't feel strange to start saying, well, maybe not yet. Maybe let's get to know each other, without that fear of, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose this donation, this kind of competitive short term, we got to get it. That's a whole cultural change that then I think once you start going in that direction really helps with this approach to gift acceptance, because then it's okay, we're going to have these conversations, we're going to understand what our beneficiaries are looking for, we're going to understand it's just a very it's not just this policy, right? It would be sort of the modus operandi of how the organization wants to function.
Well, it might be that we've drawn to a close, which is all right. Lucy, it's your meeting. We're in your hands.
That was really such an interesting conversation, and I've definitely been taking notes. I've learned lots. So thank you both, Michelle and Robin. Yeah, it just leaves us to wish everyone a happy holidays. I mean, I know it's quite early in December, but if for those we don't see, have a wonderful festive time. And of course, for any further conversations about gift acceptance policies, I'm sure Michelle would be happy to chat more, and Robin, and to talk more about, nonprofits that require gift acceptance policies. Of course, we're at the end of the line to chat more and support your social justice mission. So yeah, that's all that's left to say. And thank you. I hope that you've all gained lots from this hour. And the recording will be available on YouTube should you wish to listen to it all over again. Thank you.
Thank you so
Lucy.
much.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Juliet.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everyone.